Confucianism is an ethical and philosophical system, on occasion described as a religion, developed from the teachings of the Chinese philosopher Confucius. Confucianism originated as an ethical-sociopolitical teaching during the spring and autumn period, but later developed metaphysical and cosmological elements in the Han Dynasty. Following the official abandonment of legalism in China after the Qin Dynasty, Confucianism became the official state ideology of the Han. Nonetheless, from the Han period onwards, most Chinese emperors have used a mix of legalism and Confucianism as their ruling doctrine. The disintegration of the Han in the 2nd century CE opened the way for the soteriological doctrines of Buddhism and Taoism to dominate intellectual life at that time. A Confucian revival began during the Tang dynasty. In the late Tang, Confucianism developed aspects on the model of Buddhism and Taoism and was reformulated as Neo-Confucianism. This reinvigorated form was adopted as the basis of the imperial exams and the core philosophy of the scholar official class in the Song dynasty. The abolition of the examination system in 1905 marked the end of official Confucianism. The new culture intellectuals of the early 20th century blamed Confucianism for China's weaknesses. They searched for new doctrines to replace Confucian teachings. Some of these new ideologies include the three principles of the people with the establishment of the Republic of China, and then Maoism under the People's Republic of China. In the late 20th century, some people credited Confucianism with the rise of the East Asian economy, and it enjoyed a rise in popularity both in China and abroad. The core of Confucianism is humanistic, or what the philosopher Herbert Fingeret calls the secular as sacred. Confucianism focuses on the practical order inscribed in this worldly awareness of the Tian and a proper respect of the gods, with particular emphasis on the importance of the family, rather than on a transcendent divine or a soteriology. This stance rests on the belief that human beings are teachable, improvable, and perfectible through personal and communal endeavor, especially self-cultivation and self-creation. Confucian thought focuses on the cultivation of virtue and maintenance of ethics. Some of the basic Confucian ethical concepts and practices include Ra copyright N, Ya, and LC, and Z. Ren is an obligation of altruism and humaneness for other individuals. Yi is the upholding of righteousness and their moral disposition to do good. Li is a system of ritual norms and propriety that determines how a person should properly act in everyday life. Z is the ability to see what is right and fair, or the converse, in the behaviors exhibited by others. Confucianism holds one in contempt either passively or actively, for the failure of upholding the cardinal moral values of Ren and Yi. Historically, cultures and countries strongly influenced by Confucianism include mainland China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, as well as various territories settled predominantly by Chinese people, such as Singapore. In the 20th century, Confucianism Euro unregistered trademark's influence has been greatly reduced. More recently, there have been talks of a Confucian revival in the academia and a scholarly community. Names and terminology. Strictly speaking, there is no term in Chinese which directly corresponds to Confucianism. In the Chinese language, the character Ra meaning scholar is generally used both in the past and the present to refer to things related to Confucianism. The word Ru in ancient China has diverse meanings. Some examples include, weak, soft, to tame, to comfort, and to educate. Several different terms are used in different situations, several of which are of modern origin: school of the scholars, teaching of the scholars, study of the scholars, teaching of Confucius, Kong family's business. Three of these use Ra. These names do not use the name Confucius at all, but instead center on the figure or ideal of the Confucian scholar. However, the suffixes Jia, Jiao and Xue copyright carry different implications as to the nature of Confucianism itself. Ra Jiao contains the character Jia, which literally means house, or family. In this context, it is more readily construed as meaning school of thought, since it is also used to construct the names of philosophical schools contemporary with Confucianism. For example, the Chinese names for legalism and Mahism end in Jia. Ra Jiao and Xing Jiao contain the Chinese character Jiao, the noun teach, used in such terms as education, or educator. The term, however, is notably used to construct the names of religions in Chinese. The terms for Islam, Judaism, Christianity, and other religions in Chinese all end with jiao. Rakshua copyright contains Xua copyright, study. The term is parallel to ology in English, being used to construct the names of academic fields. The Chinese names of fields such as physics, chemistry, biology, political science, economics, and sociology all end in Xua copyright. The use of the term Confucianism has been avoided by some modern scholars, who favor Ruism or Ruists in lieu of Confucianism. Robert Eno argues that the term has been burdened with the ambiguities and irrelevant traditional associations. Ruism, as he states, is more faithful to the original Chinese name for the school. The five Confucian classics and the Confucian vision. Traditionally, Confucius was thought to be the author or editor of the five classics which were the basic texts of Confucianism. The scholar Yao Xinzhong allows that there are good reasons to believe that Confucian classics took shape in the hands of Confucius, but that nothing can be taken for granted in the matter of the early versions of the classics. Yao reports that perhaps most scholars today hold the pragmatic view that Confucius and his followers, although they did not intend to create a system of classics, contributed to their formation. In any case, it is undisputed that for most of the last 2,000 years, Confucius was believed to have either written or edited these texts. The scholar Tu Weiming explains these classics as embodying of five visions, which underlie the development of Confucianism. I Ching or Classic of Change or Book of Changes, generally held to be the earliest of the classics, shows a metaphysical vision which combines divinatory art with numerological technique and ethical insight. Philosophy of Change sees cosmos as interaction between the two energies yin and yang. Universe always shows organismic unity and dynamism. Classic of Poetry or Book of Songs is the earliest anthology of Chinese poems and songs. It shows the poetic vision in the belief that poetry and music convey common human feelings and mutual responsiveness. Book of Documents or Book of History compilation of speeches of major figures and records of events in ancient times embodies the political vision and addresses the kingly way in terms of the ethical foundation for humane government. The documents show the sagacity, filial piety, and work ethic of Yao, Shun, and Yu. They established a political culture which was based on responsibility and trust. Their virtue formed a covenant of social harmony which did not depend on punishment or coercion. Book of Rites describes the social forms, administration, and ceremonial rites of the Zhou dynasty. This social vision defined society not as an adversarial system based on contractual relations but as a community of trust based on social responsibility. The four functional occupations are cooperative. Spring and Autumn Annals chronicles the period to which it gives its name, Spring and Autumn period, and these events emphasize the significance of collective memory for communal self-identification, for reanimating the old as the best way to attain the new. Central Doctrines, Tian and Gods. Tian, commonly translated as heaven, or sky, but philologically meaning the Great One, Great Whole, is a key concept in Confucianism. It denotes the source of reality, the cosmos, and nature in Chinese religions and philosophies. The Confucians mean by Tian what the Taoists mean by Tao. In Analects 9.5, Confucius says that a person can know the movement of the Tian, and speaks about his own sense of having a special place in the universe. In 7.19 he says that he is able to understand the order of Tian. Zigong, a disciple of Confucius, said that Tian had set the master on the path to become a wise man. In Analect 7.23 Confucius says that he has no doubt left that the Tian gave him life, and from it he had developed the virtue. In Analects 8.19 he says that the lives of the sages and their communion with Tian are interwoven. Regarding gods in living nature, in Analects 6.22 Confucius says that it is appropriate for people to worship them, though through proper rites, implying respect of positions and discretion. Confucius himself was a ritual and sacrificial master. In Analects 3.12 he explains that religious rituals produce meaningful experiences. Rites and sacrifices to the gods have an ethical importance. They generate good life, benevolence, given that taking part in them implies an overcoming of the self. Analects 10.11 tells that Confucius always took a small part of his food and placed it on the sacrificial bowls as an offering to his ancestors. In Confucianism, the concept of Tian expresses a form of pantheism. Other philosophical currents, like Mohism, developed a more theistic idea of the Tian. Ethics. Confucian ethics are described as humanistic. This ethical philosophy can be practiced by all the members of a society. Confucian ethics is characterized by the promotion of virtues, encompassed by the five constants, or the Wei Kang, extrapolated by Confucian scholars during the Han Dynasty. The five constants are, Ra copyright N. Ya. Lc. Za. Zhao N. These are accompanied by the classical Za, that singles out four virtues, one of which is included among the five constants, Za Ng. Xiao. Jiao copyright. Ya. There are still many other elements, such as Ka copyright Ng, Sha to the first, Lia N, Chc, Ikung, Yn, Lia Ng, Ga Ng, Jik N, Ra Ng. Humaneness. Ren is the Confucian virtue denoting the good feeling of virtuous human experiences when being altruistic. It is exemplified by a normal adult's protective feelings for children. It is considered the outward expression of Confucian ideals. Yan Hui, Confucius's most outstanding student, once asked his master to describe the rules of Ren, and Confucius replied, "One should see nothing improper, hear nothing improper, say nothing improper, do nothing improper." Confucius also defined Ren in the following way: wishing to be established himself, seeks also to establish others. Wishing to be enlarged himself, he seeks also to enlarge others. Another meaning of Ren is not to do to others as you would not wish done to yourself. Confucius also said, Ren is not far off. He who seeks it has already found it. Ren is close to man and never leaves him. Right. Li is a classical Chinese word which finds its most extensive use in Confucian and post-Confucian Chinese philosophy. Li encompasses not a definitive object but rather a somewhat abstract idea. As such, it is translated in a number of different ways. Most often, Li is described using some form of the word right, or reason, ratio in the pure sense of Vedic to the first her, but it has also been translated as custom, mores, and rules of proper behavior, among other terms. Li embodies the entire web of interaction between humanity, human objects, and nature. Confucius includes in his discussions of Li such diverse topics as learning, tea drinking, titles, mourning, and governance. Junzi cites songs and laughter, weeping and lamentation. Rice and millet, fish and meat. The wearing of ceremonial caps, embroidered robes, and patterned silks, or of fasting clothes and mourning clothes. Spacious rooms and secluded halls, soft mats, couches and benches as vital parts of the fabric of Li. Confucius envisioned proper government being guided by the principles of Li. Some Confucians proposed the perfectibility of all human beings with learning Li as an important part of that process. Overall, Confucians believed governments should place more emphasis on Li and rely much less on penal punishment when they govern. In Neo-Confucianism, Li is discussed explicitly as underlying reason and order of nature as reflected in its organic forms. Loyalty. Loyalty is particularly relevant for the social class to which most of Confucius' students belonged, because the most important way for an ambitious young scholar to become a prominent official was to enter a ruler's civil service. Confucius himself did not propose that might makes right, but rather that a superior should be obeyed because of his moral rectitude. In addition, loyalty does not mean subservience to authority. This is because reciprocity is demanded from the superior as well. As Confucius stated, a prince should employ his minister according to the rules of propriety. Ministers should serve their prince with faithfulness. Similarly, Mencius also said that, when the prince regards his ministers as his hands and feet, his ministers regard their prince as their belly and heart. When he regards them as his dogs and horses, they regard him as another man. When he regards them as the ground or as grass, they regard him as a robber and an enemy. Moreover, Mencius indicated that if the ruler is incompetent, he should be replaced. If the ruler is evil, then the people have the right to overthrow him. A good Confucian is also expected to remonstrate with his superiors when necessary. At the same time, a proper Confucian ruler should also accept his minister's advice, as this will help him govern the realm better. In later ages, however, emphasis was often placed more on the obligations of the ruled to the ruler, and less on the ruler's obligations to the ruled. Like filial piety, loyalty was often subverted by the autocratic regimes in China. Nonetheless, throughout the ages, many Confucians continued to fight against unrighteous superiors and rulers. Many of these Confucians suffered and sometimes died because of their conviction and action. During the Ming-Qing era, prominent Confucians such as Wang Yangming promoted individuality and independent thinking as a counterweight to subservience to authority. The famous thinker Huang Zongzi also strongly criticized the autocratic nature of the imperial system and wanted to keep imperial power in check. Many Confucians also realized that loyalty and filial piety have the potential of coming into conflict with one another. This can be true especially in times of social chaos, such as during the period of the Ming-Qing transition. Filial piety. In Confucian philosophy, filial piety is a virtue of respect for one's parents and ancestors. The Confucian classic Xiao Jing or Classic of Xiao, thought to be written around the Qin Han period, has historically been the authoritative source on the Confucian tenet of Xiao/filial piety. The book, A Conversation Between Confucius and His Student Zheng Shen, is about how to set up a good society using the principle of Xiao. The term can also be applied to general obedience, and is used in religious titles in Christian churches, like filial priest, or filial vicar for a cleric whose church is subordinate to a larger parish. Filial piety is central to Confucian role ethics. In more general terms, filial piety means to be good to one's parents. To take care of one's parents. To engage in good conduct not just towards parents but also outside the home so as to bring a good name to one's parents and ancestors. To perform the duties of one's job well so as to obtain the material means to support parents as well as carry out sacrifices to the ancestors. Not be rebellious. Show love, respect and support. Display courtesy. Ensure male heirs, uphold fraternity among brothers. Wisely advise one's parents, including dissuading them from moral unrighteousness, for blindly following the parents' wishes is not considered to be xiao. Display sorrow for their sickness and death. And carry out sacrifices after their death. Filial piety is considered a key virtue in Chinese culture, and it is the main concern of a large number of stories. One of the most famous collections of such stories is the 24 Filial Exemplars. These stories depict how children exercised their filial piety in the past. While China has always had a diversity of religious beliefs, filial piety has been common to almost all of them. Historian Hugh D. Baker calls respect for the family the only element common to almost all Chinese believers. Relationships, social harmony results in part from every individual knowing his or her place in the natural order, and playing his or her part well. When Duke Jing of Qi asked about government, by which he meant proper administration so as to bring social harmony, Confucius replied, "There is government, when the prince is prince, and the minister is minister. When the father is father, and the son is son. Particular duties arise from one's particular situation in relation to others. The individual stands simultaneously in several different relationships with different people, as a junior in relation to parents and elders, and as a senior in relation to younger siblings, students, and others. While juniors are considered in Confucianism to owe their seniors reverence, seniors also have duties of benevolence and concern towards juniors. The same is true with the husband and wife relationship where the husband needs to show benevolence towards his wife and the wife needs to respect the husband in return. This theme of mutuality still exists in East Asian cultures even to this day. The 5 bonds are, ruler to ruled, father to son, husband to wife, elder brother to younger brother, friend of friend. Specific duties were prescribed to each of the participants in these sets of relationships. Such duties are also extended to the dead, where the living stand as sons to their deceased family. The only relationship where respect for elders isn't stressed was the friend-to-friend relationship, where mutual equal respect is emphasized instead. In all other relationships, high reverence is usually held for elders. Junzi. The junzi is a Chinese philosophical term often translated as gentleman, or superior person, and employed by Confucius in his works to describe the ideal man. In the I Ching it is used by Duke of Wen. In Confucianism, the sage or wise is the ideal personality. However, it is very hard to become one of them. Confucius created the model of junzi, gentleman, which can be achieved by any individual. Later, Fūzǐ defined junzi as second only to the sage. There are many characteristics of the junzi: he can live in poverty, he does more and speaks less, he is loyal, obedient and knowledgeable. The junzi disciplines himself. Ren is fundamental to become a junzi. As the potential leader of a nation, a son of the ruler is raised to have a superior ethical and moral position while gaining inner peace through his virtue. To Confucius, the junzi sustained the functions of government and social stratification through his ethical values. Despite its literal meaning, any righteous man willing to improve himself can become a junzi. On the contrary, the Xiaoran does not grasp the value of virtues and seeks only immediate gains. The petty person is egotistic and does not consider the consequences of his action in the overall scheme of things. Should the ruler be surrounded by Xiaoran as opposed to junzi, his governance and his people will suffer due to their small-mindedness. Examples of such Xiaoran individuals can range from those who continually indulge in sensual and emotional pleasures all day to the politician who is interested merely in power and fame. Neither sincerely aims for the long-term benefit of others. The junzi enforces his rule over his subjects by acting virtuously himself. It is thought that his pure virtue would lead others to follow his example. The ultimate goal is that the government behaves much like a family, the junzi being a beacon of filial piety. Rectification of names. Confucius believed that social disorder often stemmed from failure to perceive, understand, and deal with reality. Fundamentally, then, social disorder can stem from the failure to call things by their proper names, and his solution to this was zhengmang. He gave an explanation of zhengming to one of his disciples. Zai Lu said, "The vassal of Wei has been waiting for you, in order with you to administer the government. What will you consider the first thing to be done?" The master replied, "What is necessary to rectify names?" "So." "Indeed," said Zai Lu. "You are wide of the mark. Why must there be such rectification?" The master said, "How uncultivated you are, you! The superior man, junzi, cannot care about the everything, just as he cannot go to check all himself. If names be not correct, language is not in accordance with the truth of things. If language be not in accordance with the truth of things, affairs cannot be carried on to success. When affairs cannot be carried on to success, proprieties and music do not flourish. When proprieties and music do not flourish, punishments will not be properly awarded. When punishments are not properly awarded, the people do not know how to move hand or foot. Therefore a superior man considers it necessary that the names he uses may be spoken appropriately, and also that what he speaks may be carried out appropriately. What the superior man requires is just that in his words there may be nothing incorrect. Analects 13:3, tr. Leg. Zunzi chapter on the rectification of names claims the ancient sage kings chose names that directly corresponded with actualities, but later generations confused terminology, coined new nomenclature, and thus could no longer distinguish right from wrong. Since social harmony is of utmost importance, without the proper rectification of names, society would essentially crumble and undertakings would not be completed. Governance. To govern by virtue, let us compare it to the North Star. It stays in its place, while the myriad stars wait upon it. A key Confucian concept is that in order to govern others one must first govern oneself according to the universal order. When actual, the king's personal virtue spreads beneficent influence throughout the kingdom. This idea is developed further in the Great Learning, and is tightly linked with the Taoist concept of wu wei, the less the king does, the more gets done. By being the calm center around which the kingdom turns, the king allows everything to function smoothly and avoids having to tamper with the individual parts of the whole. This idea may be traced back to the ancient shamanic beliefs of the king being the axle between the sky, human beings, and the earth, reflected in the Chinese idea of the mandate of heaven. Meritocracy. In teaching, there should be no distinction of classes. Although Confucius claimed that he never invented anything but was only transmitting ancient knowledge, he did produce a number of new ideas. Many European and American admirers such as Voltaire and H. G. Creel point to the revolutionary idea of replacing nobility of blood with nobility of virtue. Junzi, which originally signified the younger, non-inheriting, offspring of a noble, became, in Confucius' work, an epithet having much the same meaning and evolution as the English gentleman. A virtuous plebeian who cultivates his qualities can be a gentleman, while a shameless son of the king is only a small man. That he admitted students of different classes as disciples is a clear demonstration that he fought against the feudal structures that defined pre-imperial Chinese society. Another new idea, that of meritocracy, led to the introduction of the imperial examination system in China. This system allowed anyone who passed an examination to become a government officer, a position which would bring wealth and honor to the whole family. The Chinese imperial examination system started in the Sui dynasty. Over the following centuries the system grew until finally almost anyone who wished to become an official had to prove his worth by passing written government examinations. The practice of meritocracy still exists today in the Chinese cultural sphere, including China, Taiwan, Singapore and so forth. Influence. In 17th-century Europe, the works of Confucius were translated into European languages through the agency of Jesuit scholars stationed in China. Matteo Ricci was among the very earliest to report on the thoughts of Confucius, and Father Prospero in Torcetta wrote about the life and works of Confucius in Latin in 1687. Translations of Confucian texts influenced European thinkers of the period, particularly among the deists and other philosophical groups of the Enlightenment who were interested by the integration of the system of morality of Confucius into Western civilization. Confucianism influenced Gottfried Leibniz, who was attracted to the philosophy because of its perceived similarity to his own. It is postulated that certain elements of Leibniz's philosophy, such as simple substance, and pre-established harmony, were borrowed from his interactions with Confucianism. The French philosopher Voltaire was also influenced by Confucius, seeing the concept of Confucian rationalism as an alternative to Christian dogma. He praised Confucian ethics and politics, portraying the socio-political hierarchy of China as a model for Europe. Confucius has no interest in falsehood. He did not pretend to be prophet. He claimed no inspiration. He taught no new religion. He used no delusions. Flattered not the emperor under whom he lived. On Islamic thought, from the late 17th century onwards a whole body of literature known as the Han Kitab developed amongst the Hui Muslims of China who infused Islamic thought with Confucianism. Especially the works of Liuzi such as Tian Fang Dik Nlci 1/4 to the first ACI 1/4 per mil sought to harmonize Islam with not only Confucianism but also with Taoism and is considered to be one of the crowning achievements of the Chinese Islamic culture. In modern times, important military and political figures in modern Chinese history continue to be influenced by Confucianism, like the Muslim warlord Ma Fujiang. The New Life movement in the early 20th century was also influenced by Confucianism. Referred to variously as the Confucian hypothesis and as a debated component of the more all-encompassing Asian development model, there exists among political scientists and economists a theory that Confucianism plays a large latent role in the ostensibly non-Confucian cultures of modern-day East Asia, in the form of the rigorous work ethic it endowed those cultures with. These scholars have held that, if not for Confucianism's influence on these cultures, many of the people of the East Asia region would not have been able to modernize and industrialize as quickly as Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea and even China has done. For example, the impact of the Vietnam War on Vietnam was devastating. However, over the last few decades Vietnam has been redeveloping in a very fast pace. Most scholars attribute the origins of this idea to futurologist Herman Kahn's World Economic Development, 1979 and beyond. Other studies, for example Cristobal K.'s Why East Asia Overtook Latin America, Agrarian Reform, Industrialization, and Development, have attributed the Asian growth to other factors, for example the character of agrarian reforms, statecraft, and interaction between agriculture and industry. Criticism. For many years since the era of Confucius, various critiques of Confucianism have arisen, including Lau's philosophy and Mises' critique. Liu Xun also criticized Confucianism heavily for shaping Chinese people into the condition they had reached by the late Qing Dynasty. His criticisms are well portrayed in two of his works, A Madman's Diary, and The True Story of R.Q. In modern times, waves of critique along with vilification against Confucianism arose. The Taiping Rebellion, May 4 movement and Cultural Revolution are some upsurges of those waves in China. Taiping rebels described many sages in Confucianism as well as gods in Taoism and Buddhism as mere legends. Marxists during the Cultural Revolution described Confucius as the general representative of the class of slave owners. Numerous opinions and interpretations of Confucianism were invented. In South Korea, there has long been criticism of Confucianism. Many Koreans believe Confucianism has not contributed to the modernization of Korea. For example, South Korean writer Kim Kyong-il wrote an essay entitled Confucius Must Die for the Nation to Live. Kim said that filial piety is one-sided and blind, and if it continues social problems will continue as government keeps forcing Confucian filial obligations onto families. Women in Confucian thought. Confucianism largely defined the mainstream discourse on gender in China from the Han Dynasty onward. The often strict, obligatory gender roles based on Confucian teachings became a cornerstone of the family, and thus, societal stability. Starting from the Han period onward, Confucians in general began to gradually teach that a virtuous woman was supposed to follow the lead of the males in her family, especially the father before her marriage and the husband after she marries. In the later dynasties, more emphasis was placed on women to uphold the virtue of chastity when they lost their husbands. Chaste widows were revered as heroes during the Ming and Qing periods. This cult of chastity accordingly, condemned many widows to poverty and loneliness by placing a social stigma on remarriage by women. However, recent re-examinations of Chinese gender roles suggest that many women flourished within Confucianism. During the Han Dynasty period, the important Confucian text Lessons for Women, was written by Banzhou, by a woman, for women. She wrote the Na-One Quarter Jai ostensibly for her daughters, instructing them on how to live proper Confucian lives as wives and mothers. Although this is a relatively rare instance of a female Confucian voice, Banzhou almost entirely accepts the prevailing views concerning women's proper roles. They should be silent, hard-working, and compliant. She stresses the complementarity and equal importance of the male and female roles according to yin-yang theory, but she clearly accepts the dominance of the yang male. Her only departure from the standard male versions of this orthodoxy is that she insists on the necessity of educating girls and women. We should not underestimate the significance of this point, as education was the bottom-line qualification for being a junzi or noble person. Her example suggests that the Confucian prescription for a meaningful life as a woman was apparently not stifling for all women. Even some women of the literate elite, for whom Confucianism was quite explicitly the norm, were able to flourish by living their lives according to that model. Joseph A. Adler has also indicated that even with the Neo-Confucians who have the reputation of discriminating against women, the actual situation was in fact quite complicated. As he writes, Neo-Confucian writings do not necessarily reflect either the prevailing social practices or the scholar's own attitudes and practices in regard to actual women. there had been a difference between textual teaching and the actual social practice by the Confucians and society in general throughout all of China's dynasties. Matthew Summers has also indicated that during the Qing dynasty, the imperial government began to realize the utopian nature of enforcing the cult of chastity. As a result, by the late Qing period, Qing officials became more tolerant and allowed practices such as widow remarrying to stand. Finally, some Confucian texts like the Chunqiu Frinlui section to the first EO squared also has passages which suggest a more equal relationship between a husband and his wife. All of these things add to the complexity of the issue of women in Confucian teaching. In 2009, for the first time women were officially recognized as being descendants of Confucius. These additions more than tripled the number of officially recognized descendants of Confucius. Catholic controversy over Chinese rites. Ever since Europeans first encountered Confucianism, the issue of how Confucianism should be classified has been subject to debate. In the 16th and the 17th centuries, the earliest European arrivals in China, the Christian Jesuits, considered Confucianism to be an ethical system, not a religion, and one that was compatible with Christianity. The Jesuits, including Matteo Ricci, saw Chinese rituals as civil rituals that could coexist alongside the spiritual rituals of Catholicism. By the early 18th century, this initial portrayal was rejected by the Dominicans and Franciscans, creating a dispute among Catholics in East Asia that was known as the rites controversy. The Dominicans and Franciscans argued that ancestral worship was a form of idolatry that was contradictory to the tenets of Christianity. This view was reinforced by Pope Benedict XIV, who ordered a ban on Chinese rituals. Confucianism is definitively pantheistic, non-theistic and humanistic, and does not involve a belief in the supernatural or in a personal god. On spirituality, Confucius said to Qi Lu, one of his students, that you are not yet able to serve men, how can you serve spirits? Attributes such as ancestor worship, ritual, and sacrifice were advocated by Confucius as necessary for social harmony. However, these attributes can be traced to the traditional non-Confucian Chinese folk religion. Scholars recognize that classification ultimately depends on how one defines religion. Using stricter definitions of religion, Confucianism has been described as a moral science or philosophy. But using a broader definition, such as Frederick Streng's characterization of religion as a means of ultimate transformation, Confucianism could be described as a sociopolitical doctrine having religious qualities. With the latter definition, Confucianism is religious, even if non-theistic, in the sense that it performs some of the basic psycho-social functions of full-fledged religions. See also: Chinese folk religion, Vietnamese folk religion, a Euro-Vietnamese philosophy, Confucian art, Confucian view of marriage, Confucianism in Indonesia, Edo Neo-Confucianism, Korean Confucianism, Neo-Confucianism, Temple of Confucius, Family as a Model for the State, Notes. References. Bibliography: Craig, Edward, Routledge Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Volume 7, Taylor and Francis, ISBN A978-0-415-07310-3. Ellman, Benjamin A., On Their Own Terms, Science in China, 1550–1900, Harvard University Press. ISBN A978-0-674-01685-9. Haynes, Geoffrey, Routledge Handbook of Religion and Politics, Taylor and Francis, ISBN A978-0-415-41455-5. Creel, Herald G. Confucius and the Chinese Way. Reprint. New York, Harper Torch Books. Fingeret, Herbert. Confucius, The Secular as Sacred, ISBN 1-57766-010-2. Goon, Geoffrey C., First Globalization, The Eurasian Exchange, 1500–1800, Rowman and Littlefield, ISBN A978-0-7425-2662-4. Ivanhoe, Philip J. Confucian Moral Self-Cultivation. 2nd Rev. ed., Indianapolis, Hackett Publishing. Nivison, David S. The Ways of Confucianism. Chicago, Open Court Press, Sinaico, Herman L., Reclaiming the Canon, Essays on Philosophy, Poetry, and History, Yale University Press, ISBN A978-0-300-06529-9. Zinzhong Yao, An Introduction to Confucianism. Cambridge, Cambridge University Press. Yang, C.K., Religion in Chinese Society, A Study of Contemporary Social Functions of Religion and Some of Their Historical Factors, University of California Press, ISBN A978-0-88133-621-4. Littlejohn, Ronnie, Confucianism, An Introduction, I.B. Torres, ISBN A184885174. Zhang, Kengsong Shen, Kuang-Lui Shun. Confucian Ethics in Retrospect and Prospect. Council for Research in Values and Philosophy, 2007. ISBN 1565182456, translations of texts attributed to Confucius, The Analects, Confucian Analects translated by James Legge. The Analects of Confucius. Translated by William Edward South Hill. The Analects of Confucius, a Philosophical Translation. Translated by Roger T. Ames, Henry Royce Ement. The Original Analects, Sayings of Confucius and His Successors. Translated by E. Bruce Brooks, A. Techo Brooks. The Analects of Confucius. Translated by Simon Leys, Analects, with selections from traditional commentaries. Translated by Edward Slingerland. External links: Confucius entry in the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Neo-Confucian Philosophy entry in the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry, Confucius, Interfaith Online, Confucianism, Confucian documents at the Internet Sacred Texts Archive. Oriental Philosophy, topic, Confucianism, Institutional, China Confucianism Network, Chinese Confucianism, China Confucian Temples, Confucius Institutes of China, China Kungzi Network.